Many men have experienced this feeling. The woman beside them suddenly changes. No arguments, no dramatic announcements, she just becomes different. At first it's subtle, but over time, the changes become clearer and harder to ignore. And if these signs appear together, you may be living with a woman who falls into the narcissistic group, especially when she enters the age of 35 to 45, the stage where narcissistic traits show themselves most clearly. These signs often reveal themselves in everyday life. For example, she used to dress simply, appropriately for work. Recently, she spends an hour choosing an outfit just to buy a few items at the store. Her phone once overflowed with photos of the family. Now it's full of carefully edited selfies. And if your compliments used to make her smile, now a single compliment from a stranger is enough to change the look in her eyes. None of this is random, because narcissistic women survive on attention. As they enter midlife, they feel clearly that the admiration from the outside world is no longer as strong as before, and that makes them uneasy. Almost unconsciously, they do everything they can to reclaim the feeling of being special. And in today's video, we're going to break down each of these signs to understand why these changes happen, and why so many men only realize it when it's already too late. And from this point on, we need to look deeper to understand the underlying picture, which is the psychological and biological roots of narcissistic women. To understand why a narcissistic woman changes so dramatically between the ages of 35 and 45, we must return to the beginning, the place where her personality, ego, and emotional system were formed. For a normal woman, looks, attention, or compliments are secondary. But for a narcissistic woman, these things are not influences on her self-worth. They are the very foundation that keeps her ego alive. From childhood, many narcissistic women grow up in one of two extremes. One, they are excessively praised, protected, and adored, as if they were the only princess in the world. Two, they are emotionally neglected, forced to build a larger-than-life persona just to survive the emptiness within. No matter which path they come from, the result is the same. They develop an ego that is inflated on the outside but hollow on the inside, constantly needing supply from others to feel valuable. From age 15 to 35, biology is on their side. Beauty, youth, and vitality become their first-class ticket to instant attention. Every compliment, every lingering glance, every flirtatious message becomes a dopamine shot feeding the narcissistic nervous system. And every man who falls for them becomes living proof. I'm special, I'm desired, I'm above the rest. But as 40 approaches, their greatest enemy finally steps into the light, time. They can no longer command attention effortlessly. They can no longer test their power with their looks. They can no longer use appearance to influence or control others. For a normal woman, this is a natural transition, painful perhaps, but manageable. For a narcissistic woman, it is not a decline in beauty, it is an existential threat. Because if she is no longer admired, no longer desired, no longer able to make men lose their minds, then what does her ego rely on to survive? At that moment, the psychological bomb inside her begins to shake. Behaviors that seem chaotic, reckless, or irrational to outsiders are, in truth, nothing more than a desperate attempt of the ego to stay alive. And once we understand the roots, it becomes much clearer why their behaviors erupt so intensely whenever their ego feels threatened. When a narcissistic woman starts asking herself, "Am I still attractive?" it is not a casual question. It is a red alert inside her narcissistic system. From that moment on, her actions are no longer simple mood swings. They transform into a full-scale campaign to pull the narcissistic supply back toward her. You will see her becoming obsessively focused on her appearance, not self-care as she claims, but weaponizing beauty to reclaim the power she feels slipping away. Intensive skincare routines, injections, cosmetic tweaks, strict dieting, excessive exercising, none of it is for health, but for reassurance. I still matter, I am still desired. Her wardrobe shifts rapidly as well. Younger, bolder, more revealing styles, sometimes almost inappropriate for her age. But to her, It is proof I can still compete with anyone. Then, like clockwork, she begins revisiting her past to intoxicate herself with old glory. Stories about ex-lovers, men who once pursued her, and how many options she used to have return again and again. Not because she's nostalgic, but because she is self-injecting her own narcissistic supply. I used to be someone everyone wanted. More dangerously, she never does this alone. Narcissistic women always find a cheerleading squad, divorced friends, dissatisfied friends, or women living in the same "I deserve more" fantasy. Wine nights turn into marriage tribunals, where the husband is dissected, the family dismissed, and stability reframed as a prison. Social media becomes the stage where her ego gets resuscitated. She posts photos, baits for likes, collects comments, and every notification acts like a sedative for her panicking ego. So when she starts saying things like, "I need space," "I need to rediscover myself," "I need freedom to explore who I am," understand that these are not mature reflections or emotional growth. They are the opening lines of a narcissistic ego preparing for war. And once we face this harsh reality, we begin to understand why the collision between narcissism and midlife becomes destructive enough to tear a family apart. For men, a midlife crisis usually revolves around the question, have I achieved enough? Is there more I want to do? They buy a new car, change jobs, try a few new hobbies, mostly just attempts to reconnect with youth. But for narcissistic women, the question is never, have I done enough? But a far more dangerous one. If I am no longer attractive, then who am I? This single question turns 40 into not a crisis, but an existential battle. Society has long been harsh toward women, glorifying youth, diminishing age. But for a narcissistic woman, the message, "you're expired," is not merely offensive, it is a dagger to the core of her identity. Every wrinkle, every subtle physical change, every moment in front of the mirror becomes evidence that her previous power is disappearing. And when she senses that power slipping away, her instinctive response is counterattack. Counterattack whom? The closest, clearest, and easiest person to blame. Her husband and her family. The roles of wife and mother, once worn proudly as crowns that earned her admiration, now become symbols of everything she resents, reminders that time has passed, that her youth was spent serving others instead of herself. And the moment this resentment grows strong enough, she begins to hate the very roles she once used to feel superior. Narcissistic women almost never take responsibility for their fears. Instead of admitting the fear of aging, of becoming invisible, of being insignificant, she begins rewriting history. Suddenly, phrases like, "You've always controlled me," "I sacrificed too much," "I was never truly myself," appear everywhere, not because they are true, but because she needs a new narrative to justify her ego's rebellion. Beautiful memories are rebranded as fake. Small mistakes are magnified into emotional abuse. And children once cherished are reframed as consequences of being trapped. The biggest difference between an ordinary woman and a narcissistic woman in midlife lies in how they respond to pain. An ordinary woman hurts but still wants to fix, preserve, and protect. A narcissistic woman hurts, and in that hurt, she is willing to burn everything down just to remain the center of the universe. And when we look even deeper into their behavior, we begin to see that the moment everything goes off track often starts from something very small. Not every midlife crisis leads to infidelity. But for narcissistic women, the mere appearance of a new supply, a timely compliment, a lingering glance is almost guaranteed to push everything dangerously far. While an ordinary woman might simply feel comforted by a kind word, a narcissistic woman treats male attention like emergency medicine for her collapsing ego. A coworker casually says, "You look so young today." An old acquaintance messages, "I used to have such a crush on you." A gym trainer comments, "Your body is still incredible." Instantly, the narcissistic brain registers. New supply detected, high potential. From that moment, the script unfolds predictably. First, He's just a friend. Later, we only talk normally. And when confronted, you're overthinking. Meanwhile, the phone never leaves her hand. Passwords change constantly, notifications are hidden, and messages are deleted instantly. Her body may not have betrayed the relationship yet, but her heart and ego have been gone for a long time. The painful truth is this: a narcissistic woman doesn't compare man to man. She compares levels of dopamine each man gives her. She comes back as someone who has regained her sense of power, someone who knows she can still make a man lose his mind. From that point on, one question burns quietly in her mind. If it worked once, wouldn't it be easier next time? That is why men feel like they are living beside a bomb. Because for a narcissistic woman, every new supply is not just temptation, it is a detonation, regardless of the cost. And once we understand how that bomb operates, we are forced to return to the most important question: why are men always the ones who suffer first? When faced with a narcissistic woman entering a midlife crisis, many men fall into the same trap, believing that if they love her more, tolerate her more, improve themselves more, she will eventually see their worth. Unfortunately, narcissistic structure does not operate that way. The core problem is not that you are not good enough, it is that she never feels anything is enough, because the emptiness inside her cannot be filled with love, only with admiration and power. Modern culture makes this even worse. Slogans like "be yourself," "prioritize your own happiness," "never settle for less than you deserve," messages that are healthy in the right context become weapons in the hands of a narcissistic woman. Any boundary from her husband can be labeled as control. Any struggle in marriage can be reframed as toxic. Any boredom or dissatisfaction in the roles of wife or mother is reinterpreted as "I'm being imprisoned." And once the narcissistic brain adopts this narrative, action becomes the next step. The brutal truth is this: you cannot heal for her. You cannot fill the void she refuses to acknowledge. You cannot save someone who sees herself as the center of the universe. What you can do and must do is recognize the signs early. Lack of empathy, constant blame, shifting, the need to be worshipped, refusal to take responsibility, and the habit of rewriting history whenever she needs a justification. And when you realize you are living with a narcissistic woman approaching midlife, you must understand this is not just an emotional storm. This is a war between her ego and reality. And in that war, you, your children, and the entire family are merely collateral damage. In the end, what tightens the chest isn't just the image of a narcissistic woman walking away from her own family. The deeper pain lies in the fact that she leaves with the belief that she is freeing herself, living her truth, pursuing happiness, while the ones left behind, her husband and her children, become nothing more than the price she is willing to pay for her so-called awakening. But when the dopamine from the new supply runs dry, when the compliments fade, when the lover reveals himself as just another ordinary man with ordinary flaws, when social media is no longer enough to fill the emptiness inside, her reality comes knocking. And reality is brutally unforgiving toward the narcissist. It forces her to face the truth that time does not negotiate, and no one can outrun themselves forever. Society may keep applauding, calling it courage, a turning point, a woman living her best life. But society is not the one staying up at night with a child crying because they miss their mother. Society is not the man who has to force a smile when his child asks, "Why doesn't mommy live here anymore?" And society certainly won't pay back the peaceful years that were burned down for a few fleeting moments of ego gratification. The lesson for men is not hate women, but rather recognize narcissism, do not romanticize it. Understand that some storms are not your fault and not your responsibility to stop. Your task is to protect your self-respect, shield your children, and refuse to let yourself be destroyed by a bomb you did not activate. Because when the narcissistic storm finally passes, the one who must stand up and rebuild a life more often than not is not her. It's you. Therefore, my advice for you is to learn to observe, recognize your own worth, set boundaries early, and never lose yourself in the effort to hold on to someone who never intended to stay. Because you deserve peace, and sometimes Letting go at the right moment is the very first step toward reclaiming your life.